to do with payments, this is something worth exploring. Adam has set up a GitHub repo of the project, so you can actually download. And it's any real world application that you're going to work on. It's going, if it's anything involving financial transactions, this is something that if you know, it's a neat thing to explore. It's usually been quite complex, but as Adam has pointed out, he has explored Square, which provides a pretty neat, it's an intermediary to make financial transactions.
Just had to get the right test account here, and it should show the transactions. So I have it hard coded to be $5 right now, but inside the controller here, you can pass in the amount as a parameter for the transaction.
And if you can provide the GitHub link that I've shown on the on eCampus.
Yeah, do you want me to post it in the chat?
You can, if you're having that open, because it's already there.
Oh yeah, sure.
See it.
But yeah, this is the GitHub link, and it has like all the instructions here with the test credit card number. I found it works best to install the Square package through Package Manager. You can just type in that command. And then also down here, there's directions for a style sheet, which is on this website. And there is themes you can pretty easily add to your project, and they give you source code for them. Here's like some stuff you have to change in your layout page to change the style of your nav bar. And to do that, you would just go inside the layout page, and you have to reference your style sheet here. And also, you put that style sheet, you got to download it from the website. And you want to download bootstrap.css, not any of these other ones, and reference it in your layout, and then change the classes for all that stuff. There's also directions on the GitHub for that. Right here at the bottom, it tells you what lines to change.
So you can use this even if you were not using the Square app. If you just want to explore, like you can see, Adam's UI is really neat. So especially if you're planning on using it for demos, for interviews, it makes it look much nicer. That's one of the things. I have done very little exploration, but as Adam, the user interface, some of you and Adam, Grayson, and a few others have actually, you have a much better sense of the UI. But what Adam was pointing out is the UI can be done relatively quickly and easily. To make it much more impressive, especially if you have a lot of interesting functionality that you want to demo. To make it more impressive for interviewers, recruiters, if you add in one of these CSS layers or shells, and Adam has given those instructions right there in that GitHub. So I'll again show that link. Adam, shall I take over now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. If we had a little more time, I would have had Adam spend more time on this. Let me share my screen now. Okay. Okay, I provided the link to Adam's payment project over here. It's on GitHub. And this is the styling, the CSS, where he's been downloading the Bootstrap and other styling files that he just puts into his project. Did somebody have a comment? Okay. Yeah, Adam, as he said, he's posted it. I've downloaded or linked to it. You can either pull the code or just download it from GitHub. The other, if you want to really get into some HTML, there is a site here where he sort of discusses the details. Also, there have been a couple of, some of you have been interviewing for software development jobs, and if you want to keep going ahead beyond, especially with anything to do with systems development type concepts or cloud concepts, especially the Plural site has a huge number of courses. Essentially, these are anywhere between 2 to 8 hour courses. These are subscription websites. Plural site is about, I think it's about $25 to $30 per month. So if you want to subscribe, if you're very serious about doing, trying to continue exploring software development and cloud web services. This is something that several developers have pointed out. Grayson had pointed out that this Zero to Mastery is a good site for if you're starting from close to scratch and you want to develop concepts, whether it's in JavaScript, Python, React. There's a lot of, especially user interface layers are done very well here. So but that's also a subscription site. So if you're interested, to refer to that. Let me move on to a discussion of there are several things I need to do, so I'm going to go a little fast today. Starting off with where we were end of last class. So the expectation is that you had the sorting working. Okay, so that's the starting point. I'd also asked you to set it up so that you have the sorting by both the columns, not just one. Okay, so if I log in as a volunteer. Okay, before, just one thing to confirm, are you, okay. Okay, what David said, if you are able to get it, I'll have to check it out too. If there is, David, if you find out, let us know whether you have to go through a link or whether the library has a set of databases. I'm not sure if it's accessible through that. Okay, David, are you able to see my different screens as I move over there?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. And also, I would like to meet with all the groups so that some groups are in very good shape, others not so much. So I want to make sure that anyone having issues or problems, we address it. So some of these meetings will be very short, but I've set everything for 15 minutes. I'm going to have to be very strict so that if we have more problems, some of you are addressing it, others, if you don't address it, well, then I cannot do much with it. Some groups I've met and you have not updated, but others who are following up, then obviously we won't need to meet that long. But if we need to meet further, we'll set up a time. But these are the times I've set up so that since next week is our last week of meetings, I wanted to make sure everyone has at least the base functionalities set up. Okay, so if I choose a client, find the matrix, I should be able to go either way with the duration, sorting by duration or by distance. Okay, so, and the concept, as I said, brings in the session so that you have, this is a useful concept where you hold on to values that you can obviously, each time you get a new client selected from the drop down, that value gets stored here. But if I'm coming from this side, not from over here, then I get a value that's already been stored and use that here. Okay, so it's a useful concept. It's something when you're so there are a couple of ways of obviously passing data. One is through just clicking on a link. So if you have list all pets, we could click on one of these links and pass the data. The other way is through the session, so you can hold on to the value and use it. The third is, of course, we have discussed if a user is logged in, you can get the, so let's see, where is that in voucher request? We saw how if a user is logged in, you can get the value. So these are different ways of accessing values from one page to another. So you have to think of how do you get access to values? How do they get passed from one view to another? And the session, as I said, is a useful tool. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to introduce that and go through applying sorting. Okay, now let's move on to the next concept, which is, okay, now we are sorting, but can we do something with it? So the distance matrix gives you the distance of each clinic from the client's address. Okay, so one of the things, one of the so actual business uses of this finding out the distance would be to say, well, we are giving a voucher for the client. If it gets approved, we also want to provide the clinic ID, the clinic, essentially give the clinic address, but the connection would be through the clinic ID to the voucher request. So what we are doing here, we'll find the nearest clinic to this client, and if we approve a voucher request from, I don't have the listing of clients here, but actually that's one of the things I'm going to have you do, is for each pet to give a listing of the client, so that when we have it approved, you can see we'll also have a listing of the veterinary clinic, so you can see the nearest veterinary clinic that gets listed here. Okay, so how do we go about doing it? So that's the part we'll do now. Okay, so conceptually, what we are going to do is assign the nearest clinic to the voucher request. So when the client gets the request, he or she will know which is the nearest clinic. And so when the voucher is getting redeemed, it will actually come from that clinic. Okay, so that's like a business application of actually using this Google service to find the nearest clinic. So let's go about, we have to make some underlying changes now in the model. So first go to the voucher request model. Okay, and then where is our voucher request? So what we are doing here is, I told you the voucher request is now getting connected to vet clinic. So which means that we need to bring in, I'll do it right here at the bottom, just before the constructor. Public. Now, vet clinic ID is an integer, but it's, so let me ask you this. This is a conceptual question. Vet clinic ID, get set. Now, will every voucher have an associated vet clinic ID? Now set the object-oriented connection, vet clinic, we'll call this vet clinic for voucher. Okay, what's the answer to that? And I guess I'll set the foreign key here. Will every vet clinic have will every voucher request have a vet clinic ID? Will it link to one over here?
I would say only approved voucher request will have a vet clinic ID.
Correct. That's as Mohammed pointed out. So you can see I've set it. We previously didn't have this link. I just set it up. So for the discussion now, so each vet clinic could be associated with multiple voucher requests. Obviously, there could be a vet clinic that's never been connected, but it could associate with many. But the other way around, as Mohammed pointed out, it's optional. It only gets connected if the voucher request is approved. So how do we so that's one of the things with MIS, and those of you who have been, some of you have interviewed with several companies. So especially the ones where there is software development involved, the connection, you're making a connection between user requirements and designing the system. Okay, so how does that user requirement get designed, the optionality of whether the voucher request not necessarily being connected to a clinic? Well, how do you design it? How will it get represented in the code here? So we took the requirements, designed it in the class diagram. The next level where we have to see that the business logic or business rule applying in the code. How do you do that?
You make the int question mark so it's optional.
Yeah, right here. So we just went through the 3 layers. First is the business logic. That's, well, you are doing your analysis, right? Then the next layer, your design, the class diagram. The third layer, it's actually the code itself. So that's really the essence of MIS. We are spanning. So if you are doing it just as a computer science person, you're just looking predominantly at the code, while the MIS is literally the bridge that you're making between the user's world and the programming world. Okay, so this is, so the other additional piece here is to initialize this vet clinic ID null initially whenever a voucher request object is created. Okay, so that's sort of, we just practiced the MIS, whatever are the MIS practice or what you do in a nutshell, this what we just did across the 3 layers. So I'm going to build this. And since we made a change to the underlying structure of our model, what should we do?
Update database.
Update database.
Okay, update database 0. So I'll move it to 0. That's usually the safest practice if you're making migrations. I'm going to add migration. What did I do? I changed or updated, changed voucher request, or if I want to make it more precise, I would say added vet clinic to voucher request. But for now, I'll just say changed voucher request. Okay, so that gets added in as a column. And then I will say update database and just without the 0. Okay, so that's taken care of. Now the next part is, so whenever we make a voucher request decision, we now, if it is an approved decision, we have to connect it to the vet clinic. Now, and then not only do we connect it to the vet clinic, but we are going to use the Google service to connect it to the nearest vet clinic. So let's see how we go about doing it. So I'm going to close some of these that we are not using. Voucher request controller. So there are 2 places where we are going to do this. One is over here, if the voucher request gets approved. Okay, so if the voucher request is getting approved, we need to find out what's the nearest vet clinic to the client who owns this pet. Okay, so which means we first need to find the client who owns the pet. So let me get the client object. So how do we get the client object? The client owns this pet, right? So where does that come from? So right now we are creating the voucher request. So we have the voucher request object available to us. If we have the voucher request object available, how do we get the client? The voucher request tells us what? So if I have voucher request, what can I get from voucher request?
We have pet ID.
Okay, the pet ID, but we can also get the pet. So if I get the pet, well, if I get the pet is the one that's directly connected to the voucher object. So I can get a request for the pet, which is the pet object, and from there we cannot, the client object is not quite created, so that's why we have to get the client ID and then get the client object. Okay, so once we have the client ID, And I'm going to go a little fast so that I can complete this. But we have, and this is where the using the interfaces becomes very efficient, because we are just calling methods on the interface. So we have a, thought we had a find, do we have a find client in that, or just find user ID? Did we ever set up a find
You
client?
have to go through client repo.
Okay, we have to go through client repo. Okay, so if we do that, that's interesting. Okay, so I have to then, okay, so which means private I client repo, I client repo. One of the things, if I do change this, what else would I have to change? If I change the parameters in the constructor,
The test class.
I have to change the test class. Okay, so make sure that you do change the test class, otherwise for now I'm just going to keep going here so that I can complete this discussion, but you have to change it. That's my expectation, that you know that you can, how to do it. Okay. So I want to find the client object. And after I find the client object, what's the purpose of finding the client object?
So we can do a distance matrix for the vet clinics.
Okay, so that I can do the distance matrix, for that, I need the client's address, right? So I need to use that to compare it with the vet clinic. So I'm going to say string client address, client dot address. Okay, so I have the client's address. The next thing becomes I need to be sending this address over to some place where it would do its work and give me, so let's see, what do I need here in the voucher request? What is the value that I need to put in the voucher request to know that it's been assigned to a particular vet clinic? What is the property I need to assign? The property that we just created, right? Vet clinic ID. So we need to give a value for this vet clinic ID. Now, I'm going to create a variable here, or you can actually do it directly here as well. So we have to figure out, how do we get this integer value? Okay, where do you think we need to go to get this value? Where is all the work being done to get the nearest the nearest clinic to some origin point?
Vet clinic controller.
In the vet clinic controller. So which means that we need to go into this to do to find something. So, but I don't want to leave this. So for now, I'll just say this is some ID 1. I'll come back and we'll see how we can get this. But what Mohammed said, we need to go to this vet clinic controller. So if we want to use a method that's inside the vet clinic controller, what do we need to do? Vet clinic controller is a class, right? Anytime you have a class and you want to use a method that belongs to that class, what do we do?
Bring in its constructor.
Yeah, we have to use the constructor to construct an object, right? So which means vet clinic controller. I'll just use vet clinic controller and then say new vet clinic controller. And here there is we have to provide some input parameters here. Vet clinic repo, application user repo, client repo. Now let's see if we have vet clinic repo here. We don't have it. So if we don't have it here, that's another one that we need to bring in. Vet clinic repo, vet clinic repo. So even though we are not directly using it in the voucher request controller, we need it to be able to create the vet clinic controller, or call that vet clinic controller. So that's why I'm bringing this in. Again, I'm going a little fast because I need to try to complete this discussion. I'm hoping you're following along. If not, hopefully this makes sense to you. Okay, so the reason I brought this in is for this, it needs 3 parameters. If I don't send those 3 parameters, it's not going to be able, I cannot call it, it will complain. So, so all of these, I need to use the object that I created of the interfaces. So vet clinic, application user, and clinic repo. Okay. So once I've created this vet clinic object, then I can say vet clinic controller dot, this is the object, and I can try to find, so all of these, like it says, find distance between origin and what I really need is that one clinic that's the closest. So while I have the matrix, what I really need is a method that uses this to just return back the nearest clinic. Okay, so that method doesn't exist as yet. So I'm going to go to we have most of it available to us, but that last piece, which just returns back just that one clinic, the nearest clinic ID, is not available. So again, I'm just going to comment this out for now, and then we'll create that method, come back and call it. Okay, so I'm going into vet clinic controller now, and let's see. So we have to use this, the matrix right here. So the matrix gives us, we've been using this create distance matrix. If we give an origin, it comes back with a matrix of all the clinics with the distances from, so distance matrix, which gives you basically this, where is our result here? Okay, so if I went to, since I made some code changes, I don't know if it's going to provide, but basically that matrix is this matrix here. Okay, so what we want is, in this case, whichever the client is, I don't know which client this voucher request is for. If it was for, if the pet belonged to client 1, it would be the Mountaineer Veterinary Clinic. If it belonged to client 2, the nearest clinic to client 2 is Hillcrest Veterinary Clinic. So we want to return whatever is the nearest one to that particular client. Okay, so if we went back in here, we basically have to get that matrix, this matrix here, and then from within that, well, we are doing it for displaying here, where we get where we order it. Now, but this is for display purposes, so we could obviously try to combine the code. If we had a little more time, we could explore it, how we can use this. But right now, I just want to find the nearest vet clinic. So I'm going to create this public method, find nearest vet clinic. Okay, and what would be the input parameters? What is the return? Okay, you should be able to tell me what's the input that this find nearest vet clinic requires. Remember, we are going to use this method create. So basically, we are going to get this. Oops, I was going to just copy this here. List. Okay, so we are going to use this method right here. So create distance matrix, we need to give what the origin has to be, and we are going to expect back this distance matrix. Okay, so you have to figure out what does this origin represent. One of you should be able to tell me what does this represent.
It represents a
Yeah.
client. No?
Pardon? Go ahead.
Does it represent a client?
Yeah, the client. The origin is the client. So if you want to make it meaningful, client address. So this client address we need to send. Remember the parameter name here for this method is origin, but when we are sending it, when we are calling it, we can call it by any name. So we'll call it as client address. So in the other method, in create distance matrix, you're thinking of origin and destination and comparing the two. But here, finding the nearest vet clinic, we are thinking of, well, this is the client address, find the nearest clinic. So you have to, this is part of your, so again, as I said, this is sort of MIS reasoning in a capsule. You want to, the naming that you use, all of these become very crucial. That's really where you add value. If you use a meaningless name here, like you might think you're getting the functionality, but you're not really adding value because it's not meaningful from what's actually happening, what you're doing for in the user's world. Okay, so we are making the connection between the two, but you also need to understand how you design and develop. So over here, so making the connection, what is the return data type? What are we returning?
Vet clinic.
The clinic or the clinic ID, so which is a integer, right? So we need to have inside, remember this is just a data type that you're returning. So again, to make it meaningful for somebody who comes in, like you have done the development and 6 months or 1 year later, somebody comes in and they need to know what exactly this integer is. So if you just said return value, and I just said, let's see, 0 or something. Now, and then I'll say, well, this is return value. If you did this, well, there's somebody who's going to be, well, let's say you hopefully you won't be in the company for the person who's looking at it to find you. But you would still be subject to all kinds of, words that probably cannot be said in public. why would somebody be really upset with you?
Because it doesn't mean anything to anyone but you.
Yeah, so what should you be calling it?
Vet clinic ID.
Very good. Clinic ID. So do simple things. If you are going to be working on systems projects, the life of most projects are going to be much beyond the number of years we spend in an organization. So try to make it where it's not only, well, you have to think of who's going to use it after you, so that it has to have meaning from the business context. So we need to find this and send it back
Is
to
it the clinic or
wherever.
client ID?
I'm sorry, clinic ID. I'm sorry, clinic ID. Thank you. So if I did this, I would be subject to being called names. Okay, thank you for correcting that. So if I go back here, so basically I can now change this to the method that I am calling. And what's that method I'm calling? Find nearest vet clinic. So it's going to return an integer. What should I give it as its input?
Client address.
This client address here. I again left out an S there. Okay, so client address being passed in. This is going to do the processing. There is still something missing. So this distance matrix that's being generated, I need to say distance matrix. Okay, what am I doing on the distance matrix? I need to order by, and if I want to get the nearest one by distance, what do I do? Order by. Okay, now this will give me the entire matrix. Do I need the entire matrix for the nearest clinic?
Could you use the first or default?
Okay, the first, I just want the first one. First or default or just the first. Okay, so this gets me the first object. And then this is, remember, it's the view model. So what exactly do I need? I'm saying I'm returning back the clinic ID. So all that I need is just this vet clinic ID of the nearest clinic. So on the left side, I have the clinic ID. Okay. And this pretty much, so we are using the Google service to get the closest clinic, and we are using it for a business application or purpose now. So that was, so we are not just using it for some meaningless reason to just view it, but actually can connect it up with a purpose of when we make a voucher decision to connect. So if we go ahead, build this. Okay, so the rest of it should be as is. So there's no argument, client repo. Well, this unit test, I'm going to have you fix it, okay? So there will be a build error with the unit test. Well, if you, I guess I'll just go ahead, and there are going to be, so this is expecting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters. We only have 3. So, but I should be able to run the application. So fix this one for the unit test. So let's see. I'm going to start log in as a I'll go to list all pets. Okay, now if I go ahead and say this is approved, so let's say over here I'll say this is approved. Okay, so in addition to this getting approved, if you, let's see, we don't have, so what I would like for you to do is, and we don't have this here, so I'll put it in Notepad. So whenever you're listing the voucher requests, you need to add in, so there should be a column for customer name. So these are the things. So when you push the code by noon tomorrow, the first one is fix the unit tests that are where there's a build error. So which means the controller constructor fix the build error. The second is in the list, which is we use a partial view. So in the partial view, I'll just say list pets view. You want to be able to see the customer name and address. Okay, and then I also want to see for just the approved, those that are approved, I want to see the vet clinic. So I want to see at least the vet clinic name. So at least on the voucher, you'll have the vet clinic address, but at least I want to see the vet clinic name so that you can see, well, let me just make it, since we are getting the name, I'll just get the name and address so that you can see. Anyways, it's something that you should be able to figure out, especially if you're generating, we are not giving reports, but if you're looking at reports, to make it useful, you want the name and address. So you have the concept of how to do it. I want you to show it. So the value is there. It'll be in the database that's connected. Now you need to figure out a way of bringing it into this view. Otherwise, we won't be able to see where the request has been assigned to which clinic. But that's the business logic behind the scenes, how the connections are being made. Okay, so this is this would be the last piece of the entire, as I was saying, the MIS workflow is we sort of complete the circle by saying, okay, so this was the user request. They needed to connect up the voucher request to a vet clinic, and so when we hand this voucher over or mail it to the customer or client, I guess it is the client, not the customer, it's the owner of the pet. So we want to send it to the client's address, along with providing the vet clinic name and the address on the voucher. Okay, and obviously it would have the amount for the voucher. So that, as I said, completes the entire cycle, starting from finding out the requirements, designing it in the class diagram, implementing it in the program logic, and finally displaying it to the user, or you can generate a PDF or a printout based off of this. Okay, but those are your requirements. The next thing I want to move on to is doing autocompletes. I'm trying to do it with two examples. One would be for a stock, for like a stock application. There's one group which is working with stocks, but I wanted to use this because there is, I also wanted to show how to work with mass inserts. So you'll have to go to the course eCampus site. Okay. There's one part that I wanted to bring in, which I'll discuss next class. But so let's see, there is this JSON data that's provided. There are several stock websites where you can get APIs, and also some places where you can get JSON or comma separated version files. So this is a JSON file that's provided of all the stocks that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So if you go ahead, download this, I'm just going, you can save it to whichever location you, and then after you save it to some location, I'm going to have you copy it into a particular. Okay. I think I already have this, but let's see, class discussion. Just save it to some location where you know you can find it. Okay. Not save it because I have it here. And after you do that, see, this is the file, JSON. I'm going to copy this, Control C, come into my application. I'm going to put it under this data folder. Okay, so this is going to be this is the JSON data. You can see the name, which is the stock symbol. So this is the name and the value for this Agilent Technologies. This is the ticker symbol, and then the company name is this. So you have, each one is having the symbol and the name, and the name itself in the JSON file is ACT symbol with a space, and this is company name with a space. Now what I'm going to have you do is open up this stock.txt. Okay, so we know, so this is a class that's not directly related to what we are doing, but I'm going to have you just create this class. It's a stock class. I pre-built all of this so that you can sort of create, not have to write all of this code, because that will take too long. So this is the class. You need to go in here on the models. I'm going to add a new class. Okay, this is stock. Okay, and just copy it over this entire class here. This is the namespace, so just you can copy this over it. Okay, so I have two constructors, just as we do with every class. I'm using the JSON property converter, so I'm going to have to bring in the using statement there. So it's coming, the JSON data is coming in with this property name, ACT symbol company name. I don't want my properties or columns to have spaces here. I want, so I'm saying this was the property name that I'm using, but I'm reading it into, so when it comes in JSON, it comes in this form, but when I read it in, it's going to read into these columns. Okay, so So I'm going to generate this as my as a table. So which means, again, let's see how many of you remember this. If I want, I'll first build this. Well, I'll just rebuild the project alone because I know the solution won't build because of the test error. Okay, so I'm not fixing that right now. I want to, so you can see that it succeeds for the project alone. Okay, so what do I need to do to move this to the database? Let's see if you remember, this has been a little while since we did this.
We will need to have a key for stack ID.
We would need, pardon? I didn't get you.
We will need to have a key for stack ID.
Okay, I forgot to add that. But actually, one of the things that .NET Core does is even if you don't add the key, it actually it uses any column name with an ID and automatically makes it a key on the database. But it's always better practice to do that. But there is another piece that you need to do, without which it won't go to the database.
Just to add the
What's
DB
that?
set in application DB context.
Okay, in application DB context, public DB set stock, and I'm just going to say stock at set. Okay, so without this, if we try to migrate, it's not going to go through. Let's see, again, I'm going to rebuild just the app. And then after that, I'm going to go through again, doing the update database 0. And then add the migration and then say update database. Oops, the build failed. Okay, so now I guess I probably have to fix the test, although it's trying to build the entire, okay, so I wanted to not have to do this, but I have to, I guess, to get this to migrate. So what's missing? I have mock pet, mock voucher, mock application. I'm missing client and vet clinic. So I need to add those two. Private mock a client, mock client repo. Okay, mock repo. Okay, so that's one. Okay, and the second one is private. What was the last one? Vet clinic. I should, well, just to make it private mock I vet clinic repo mock vet clinic repo. Okay, and then I have to create this object mock vet clinic repo new mock. Okay, and then this is the last one, mock vet clinic repo dot object. Okay, let me build the solution. Okay, now let me do update database 0. Okay, add migration added stock. Okay, and the last is I have to say update database. So this adds the stock table into the database. So if you were to go to the database and if I refresh right here, okay, I have my stock table. So the first thing that I wanted to show you was how do you populate a database by using data like a mass insert. And for the mass insert, well, we are going to add data to the stock. So you need a stock repo, and I also need a list. So which means I need an interface, iStock repo. Okay, so I'm going to have to go back here and under models, I need to say add. I need to add a new item, which is an interface. So this is something that's what we were doing routinely. iStock repo, the interface. Okay, so this is the interface. Remember, it has to be public. And then I have an implementation of the interface that goes to the database. Okay. Again, I've pre-written this so that it sort of helps us to move a little faster. These are all concepts that we have discussed multiple times. So this is, instead of iStock repo, this is the class implementing stock repo. So I'll just call it stock repo. And again, I'll just copy the code right over this. So this should implement the iStock repo. I have to bring in some using statements here. Okay, once I bring that in, this should be fine. So I can go ahead and build the solution. Okay, so this should, what I've introduced is the interface and the connection, the implementation going to the database. Okay, so these are sort of standard template, like I just have add. So this is going to add a list of stocks instead of one stock at a time. So that's the one difference here. It's taking a while to build. Okay, so that's, so I'm going to add a range. So this is a mass insert instead of an insert of one object at a time. Now, the controller, I've also pre-coded, okay, so that you don't have to start from scratch. So the controller, you'll have to right-click here. Obviously, if it's not building, it should build for you. It's this right now, like, as you can see, it said build succeeded. So if I go to the controller here, okay, it seems to have frozen. Okay, I might need to close this and open this back. Okay, let me just, while it's opening, So what I'm going to do is, hopefully it's not the entire, is anything else responsive here or not? Okay. I can close this out. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I think this is built, right? Okay. If I right click now on the controller, what I want to do is to create a new controller, add controller. It's going to be an empty controller. Okay, and the name of this controller, use the name that I have provided here. So it's going to be stock controller. Okay, so the stock controller is going to have all of this inside of it. If you want, you can copy the entire class and just copy it over this entire class here. Okay, and then since, again, these are using statements that we need to bring in. Okay, now so there are two parts to this. The first one, I wanted to show you how to read it, and the second one was the autocomplete. I think I will have to do the autocomplete part as I'm going to have to do that, I think, as a additional recording. I'm going to be meeting with student groups until 2 o'clock, so I'll record it for the autocomplete. I'll record it around 2:30 and post it. But I'm going to show you how you would do a mass read from JSON. Okay, so I'm just going to, in the controller class here. I'm going to create a public method. It doesn't have to return anything, and I'm going to just say read and save stocks. And inside, so the first thing I have to say is, where is this file available? So I'm going to give a file path. So that's the variable I'm setting up. So there is a directory class which is under system.io. So you have to bring in using system.io, input, output, and then I need to specify get the current directory wherever I currently am, and then I specify the path to data, and then I'll get the file itself. Okay, so within quotes, so wherever I am currently, and then I have to navigate into the data directory, so slash data, and then I have to specify this file name exactly as is. That's going to be NYSE for New York Stock Exchange underscore listed underscore stocks underscore JSON. So they basically have this underscore to indicate, well, JSON or dot CSV, and then we have to add the dot JSON to indicate the data type of this file. Okay, so this is the path to this file. I'll have to close semicolon. And then once we have the file path, I can read in the data. I'm going to use a generic variable. I'll just say stock data in JSON. So the stock data in JSON format, I'm going to read it, and I can read it. There is a file clause, and this file clause, I think I can use a using statement. It's not showing up. Okay, I'll give the entire path to this. Comes under system.io.file. Okay, I thought it would pick up system.io since you're having a using statement there. Okay, so there are various read statements, so that read methods. The simplest one is read all text. Okay, and I give the path where the file is. And then once I've read it in, I now need to convert. Okay, so we previously were converted it from a list of some class data to JSON. Okay, now we are doing the reverse. We are taking JSON and converting it. So when you from class objects, so I'll just say class objects, moving it to JSON. That's called serialization. Okay, so you're serializing the objects to be able to store it in some standard format. Now, the opposite, if you're going from JSON to, so the opposite, I'll just say opposite of that, is called deserialization. So you're basically taking something that was used as a storage format, JSON or comma separated, all of those are called serializations because it's easier to store. Now we have to deserialize it. And so in this case, we are going to say JSON convert dot, and I have to bring in the using statement here. Okay, there is a method called deserialize the object. And I'm deserializing not just one object. I'm going to deserialize, they're going to be like 3,000 stock listings. So it's going to be a list, but it's not only a list, but it's a list of stock. So you can see there is, so we indicate the data type, the angle brackets, and then we say it's not only one object, it's a list of objects. So we are deserializing whatever we got in, which is stock data in JSON. Okay. Now we deserialize and we are going to get this, a list of stocks. So list of stock, and we'll call it plural stocks. And so now we have the objects getting created. So these 3,000 odd stocks which were in JSON format now are in the list. And remember that when we set up our stock repo, we said we are sending a list of stocks to get added. So we use add range. So this is how you do a mass insert using pre-existing JSON data. So you would say I stock repo dot add stocks and send in the stocks. Okay. Now this is, I deliberately didn't make it visible because you want to potentially just call this method once. I'm going to build this and then run it. So, and then call this, you probably want to have this accessible only to an admin because you don't want to constantly be reading and saving stock. You want to you want to make changes only when there is a new stock listing or some stock is eliminated. So it's going to be mainly updating and deleting rather than rereading the same JSON data. Okay, so how do you do this? So I'll show you the table itself as of now. If you just select top 1000 rows, and you can see it's empty now with the 3 columns. Now, if I run this, I have to run this app, debug, start without debugging. Once it runs, I'm going to call this method read and save stocks from stock controller. It doesn't have a view, so you cannot just click somewhere and call this. It has to be. So I have. Well, you could set up a link, but you really don't want to have somebody just be constantly clicking on a link to populate. So I'll have stock, and then I'll say read and save stocks. Okay, so I'll run this. Okay, so this is something you should know why it's happening. I have an interface, right? And the interface, anytime you introduce a new interface, you need to go into startup and set the connection between the interface and stock repo. Save this. Let me see if it will do it now. Need to get this method, which is read and save stocks. We are not giving any response back to the user, so ideally we should, after it reads and completes, so you can see it stopped spinning, so it's completed, we should give some response back to make it user friendly. But just to, since we are trying to get this, okay, so you can see it populated. There were 1,000, well, there are 1,000 rows that show up, but if I remove this top 1,000, you'll see that it's actually more than 1,000 rows. It's going to be near 3,298 rows. So this is a way of doing the mass insert. There is something very similar to read from instead of JSON. If you were having a CSV file, that's there are ways of reading it too. Okay, I'll stop now, but I have to tell you that that I'll be posting. So please look at, this is something that you might want to apply for your project. So this is obviously reading, but I also I wanted to use this large amount of data so that you can see how autocompletes are done. So in this case, we'll be typing, or the user enters, starts entering the stock name, and as they're entering, they get a listing of all the stock names, and when they select one of them, you'll get the stock symbol. And usually whenever you use a web service, and I've given one of the web services that's quite popular, you'll send the stock symbol. The web service needs the stock symbol to do its processing to come back with how many stocks were traded, what's the volume, what was the high price, the low price on a particular day. All of it is usually given or driven through the stock symbol. So I'm going to discuss that, and then I'll use exactly the same code. So this is stock autocomplete. Google provides a service called address autocomplete. Now, I was hoping that I would complete the stock autocomplete, but obviously I haven't. So I'm going to complete this. This will take me about 15 minutes. So I will record this first, and then I will use the code that I worked on for stock autocomplete to show you how to do address autocomplete. And this will maybe take 5-7 minutes because I will literally copy the code from here to do this, but we'll be using a web service to, and I will record this around 2:30. It'll be about a 30-minute video that you should watch, and it's hopefully you will use that for your group projects. Okay, so these are the things I already fixed the unit test. So you need to do 2, 3, and 4 for your individual project. As far as the group project is concerned, keep applying whatever I've been discussing. I will meet with every group. Want every group to try to use at least one web service, and that's why I've been trying to introduce various of these services. See how you can use it, customize it for your needs. Okay, I'll stop now, but please do come back around 3 o'clock or so, or anytime later today, and then check out the video that I've recorded for these two autocomplete functionalities. Okay, I'll see you when I'm meeting the groups. Okay, let me stop sharing now.